They are irrational, unreasonable, irresponsible. They use excessive imagination instead of thinking rationally. They are naive, close to nature, and hence dangerous to themselves and others. They cannot look after their own interests, so we must do this for them. This is only temporary, of course. In due time, they will be just like us, rational, reasonable, responsible. We rule over them because we care for them, and we do it today so that we won't have to do it tomorrow. Now, in light of the title of my talk, you might have guessed I was referring to the way we usually speak of the young. The label childhood has been used in everyday parlance, in psychology, pedagogy, and political theory, from Plato through Kant to Arendt and beyond, to justify and naturalize their oppression. But the very same logic, which legitimizes domination by claiming the dominated currently lacks something crucial for an autonomy, for an autonomy, they will only have in the future, is also applied to other groups. Savages, natives, the lower classes, to name but a few. Now, despite the obvious difference in time scale, years in the former case, generation, or even centuries in the latter, the logic is the same as are its justifications. Yet while in other cases we have learned to call oppression by its name, even if it is decorated with lofty words and ornamented with good intentions, this is not the case with children. Their oppression is usually transparent, appearing natural even to critical theorists and activists. Think of the struggle against patriarchy, which has become one of the battle cries of contemporary feminism. The ruling party is, of course, not only, maybe not even primarily, the man in relation to the woman or wife. He is also the father in relation to his children. It has been a while since we came to acknowledge that a woman is not born but rather becomes one, but we fail to see that the child too is not born but rather becomes one. Understanding the concept of childhood as political, recognizing that our relation to children involves oppression, requires both reasoning and a stretch of the imagination. My argument is that we must object to the structural oppression of children and imagine a different meaning of childhood, not only as part of an inclusionary movement which applies emancipatory politics to ever more groups in a process that extends even to non-human animals and inanimate objects, some would say ad absurdum. Our relation to children is paradigmatic also to the oppression of others. When early modern Europeans sought to justify their domination of various populations, both at home and overseas, the most accessible logic was the one applied to their own offspring. While the relation to children was by no means the cause, it was arguably the playground in which the West honed the political language at the heart of modern colonialism and capitalism. Hence, child liberation is not only another struggle intersecting and collaborating with others, it involves liberation from an entire language, an entire way of thinking that legitimizes many other forms of oppression. As long as this logic is prevalent, it will be exceedingly difficult for other groups to be emancipated. In short, reconceptualizing and reimagining children is important not only for them, but to radical progressive politics in general. Now, whoever had a chance to interact with children might wonder at this point whether in this particular case, domination is not in fact justified. Structural analogy is not always a sufficient argument, and the parallel between children and other oppressed groups is not enough to convince us of the need for fundamental reconsideration of children's place in society. Even if the logic we apply to children is habitually misused, this does not mean it's wrong. So, can children really be equal political subjects? Is excluding them from politics not for their own good? As for the first question, while the prevailing concept constitutes children as apolitical, or at least as incapable of serious, productive political action, children, in fact, have always been involved in politics. Much has been said about young people's role in the contemporary struggle against climate crisis, in which they have a special interest as those who will suffer its long-range consequences. But Greta Thunberg and her generation have not invented anything. Children have been politically active throughout history, not only as victims, but as active, influential agents. They have fought on crusades, ruled and married for political purposes. At least in some of these cases, young age has not been a constraint, but rather the factor enabling or motivating political action. Still, one may ask whether limiting children's political participation is not for their own good. Right? After all, the modern conception of childhood represents a significant improvement over previous eras in which there has hardly been awareness of children's special needs. Will child equality not literally throw the baby out with the bathwater? Will it not legitimize child conscription, child labor, or child abuse? Not necessarily. Equality and sensitivity to spatial needs are not mutually exclusive, as is evident, for example, in the way we usually treat those on the other side of the age scale, namely the elderly. As in the case of other disabilities, temporary or permanent, we must do everything to prevent them from disenfranchising entire populations. Hence, although our current conception of childhood is oppressive, we must not dispose of this concept altogether, but rather rethink it, reimagine a society in which children's various needs are met without denying their political equality. What will such society look like? One immediate answer concerns the right to elect and be elected. Every democracy denies this right to those below a certain age, thus excluding them from an essential aspect of political life. The issue of lowering voting age is in fact being discussed in various countries, including some US states, and some scholars and activists insist that the struggle for child liberation must entail its complete elimination. This is not as absurd an idea as it may sound, and there are practical suggestions and policy recommendations already blazing this trail. But even this demand is far from exhausting the problem of political equality. The formal right to vote is by no means synonymous with political equality, as Israel's Palestinian citizens can testify. In fact, the problem goes far beyond the prevailing discourse of children's rights, which are given by adults, protecting the young while pinning them down to their role as inferiors. A society in which children are not subordinated to adults involves reorganization of various arenas, the family, school, the economy, so that child inferiority is no longer inscribed into their infrastructure. The difficulty of concretely imagining such a reality is not only a result of the fact that the hierarchical relations between children and adults are baked right into the cake we call society. It is also because children must take active part in conceiving and shaping such reality. The attempt to imagine it for them without them is bound to defeat itself. We seem to be facing a vicious circle. Without children, we are unable to imagine a society in which they are equal partners, and they will not take part in shaping our political imagination until they are equal partners. One way out of the circle is saying that it is simply not up to us adults. When children imagine a society in which they are politically equal and struggle to realize it, as women and other groups have, we will be able to share their vision and follow their lead. The fact that they have not yet done so indicates that their political imagination is no less limited than ours. For this and other reasons, we must return to the circle, examine the vicious logic behind it, and ask how it can be stopped. This will enable us not only to articulate the necessary yet insufficient condition for child equality, but also to demonstrate how the reconceptualization of children is essential for politics in general. The circle described above parallels the one Jacques Rancière calls the method of inequality. This method presumes to combat inequality by applying systematic knowledge of its causes and of the proper way to egalitarian society. The problem is that those suffering from inequality, because they suffer from inequality, lack precisely that knowledge and need others to direct them. A circle is formed because this method produces precisely the problem it wishes to solve, namely inequality, as it constitutes the unequal, the oppressed, as incapable, thus reproducing the existing power hierarchy. The crucial element of the circle, which makes it both effective and paradigmatic, is time. A particular relation between time and politics or political subjectivity. Time appears here in the form of deferment, the logic of not yet, of soon, of in the future. Of course, equality is good, but to be politically equal, you must first grow and acquire skills and knowledge. Then again, there is always more to grow, more to know, stretching this logic ad infinitum. So this logic of deferment traps countless oppressed groups in a circle of inequality. But it is precisely particularly effective when applied to children. Wait, kid, your time will come. But first you have to learn, experience, develop. In this particular case, mind you, the promise is usually kept. As children grow to become adults, they do become equal to other adults of the same class, gender, ethnic origin, and so on. The circle spins on, but those at the bottom are replaced with new children, newcomers, as Hannah Arendt called them. From the point of view of the individual, waiting pays off. Subordination turns into superiority. For the adult who does not necessarily remember what it was like to be a child, the logic of deferment makes perfect sense. The catch is that the apparently successful application of this logic to children enables its application to others, making the false promises given to other subordinated groups seem trustworthy. The logic of deferment must be rejected, first and foremost with relation to children. This cannot be done gradually. We cannot defer the rejection of deferment. This is the whole point. A decision is needed, a categorical resolution to see children as equal now, in the present, and unconditional equality, independent of any future achievement. Then provide evidence for this de facto equality, as it is undoubtedly possible to provide evidence against it. But we will never have political equality unless we choose to see it here and now. Seeing children as our political equals does not mean, of course, ignoring the various ways equality is denied to them, how they are being oppressed and discriminated against. On the contrary, this is exactly what makes inequality a disgrace we are all responsible for overcoming, regardless of age. The childhood we have to reconceptualize is still a name for a lack, but this lack lies not in the children, but rather in society, in the inadequate ways it treats children. The lack resides also in the definition itself. We can define children as those who are oppressed or discriminated against due to young age. A conceptualization whose political significance lies in its tension with prevailing conceptualizations that imply justifications for oppression. But this new conceptualization lacks positive dimension, a concrete image in which both political equality and responsiveness to spatial needs are brought together. This requires not only reason, but also imagination, that very faculty we ascribe to children when portraying them as inferior. Thank you.